Oh no, forgot my scraps. Damn it. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kendra, and in this video, I'm going to do a stash and tell all about my sock yarn. Here it is. There's a lot of it. I think there's a lot of it. So I wanted to share what's here and some of my project plans and how I intend to tackle my sock yarn stash. At the beginning of this year, I put out a video covering my 2024 knitting intentions. And in that video, I think I mentioned, although the no-buy of 2023 had ended, I still wanted to be conscious about my yarn acquisition practices, and I wanted to reel in my purchase of sock yarns and ban the random impulse purchases of single skeins of sock yarn. Something to that effect is what I mentioned in that video. And sometime after recording that video, I'd actually took a look at my sock yarn stash, and I realized that it was not nearly as bad as I had made it out to be in my head. I think at the beginning of 2023, I was in a spot where I was overwhelmed with the amount of sock yarn that I had, and I knew I wanted to use it up. And that's kind of what inspired the 1 sock a month knitting challenge that I did all throughout 2023 and that I'm carrying with me into this year. All through 2023, I was consistently knitting socks. I knit 6 full pair of socks, which may not seem like a lot for other people, especially those enthusiastic sock knitters, but socks are never my primary whip. They are always sort of a background project. So they're never really top of mind in terms of my knitting project, but socks I love wearing, so I always have them on the needles. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. My point is, through 2023, I consistently knit through my sock stash. I was knitting my 1 sock a month, and I was making slow but steady progress in terms of using up the sock yarn stash that I had brought into that new year. In the back of my mind, I sort of maintain that mindset of my sock yarn is too much. I need to work through it. I cannot buy any more. And I kind of held on to that mentality into 2024. And it wasn't until after I made that video that I actually pulled out all of the sock yarn in my stash and I looked at it. And I think I had like 6 skeins, which even me, as conservative as I can tend to be when it comes to yarn stash, even I thought that wasn't that bad. So something flipped in my brain and I allowed myself free will to buy whatever sock yarn spoke to me and not really limit myself on the sock yarns that I bought. And very quickly, over the past few months, I have acquired quite a bit. I've enhanced my stash multiple times over from what it was at the beginning of this year. And I don't really feel good or bad about it. I feel very neutral about it, but looking at it here and talking about it has informed me of a limit that I didn't know I had before. And I think I've reached that limit with where my sock yarn stash is now. I say all that to say that I'm content. I'm content with my sock yarn stash, and I don't feel the need to buy up anymore. Earlier this year, when I realized it's not that bad, I bought up all of the sock yarn I could get my grubby little fingers on in the de-stash space of the internet. Anytime someone would post that they have some sock yarn that they're de-stashing, I would jump on it. I didn't care. I was just grabbing all of it. All of it. I'm drawing a line. The line is drawn. The line is in the sand, and I will not cross it. I'm going to reel it in terms of the sock yarn purchases. And I don't see that as a bad thing. I think I'm really excited to work through what I have, but that's kind of where I'm at with my sock yarn stash as a bit of an introduction into today's video. And a high level, I guess, overview of what's here. that I think is a little bit interesting. One is that most of this yarn is hand dyed, which I cannot say the same for my collection of yarns reserved for sweaters and garments. I tend to lean more towards commercially dyed, commercially produced yarns for my garment knitting, but for socks, nothing is off limit in terms of hand dyed, fun colors, variegated, mostly tonal, but I definitely give myself a lot more freedom to choose fun and more unique things when it comes to my sock yarn as opposed to garment yarn. The other interesting thing about my sock yarn collection is that most of this, I think all but 5 skeins, have been purchased secondhand from someone's D-stash. So a lot of this yarn came from that, which is good because being that most of it is hand dyed can get expensive. I love a good deal, as many of us do. And so I gave myself that freedom to just buy up all of the D-stash sock yarns that I could get my hands on. And this is where I'm at. So let's do a quick show and tell of everything that's in here. I'm gonna dump it out on the bed so that I can pick up the skeins that I want to show you. I'm gonna start with my commercially dyed yarn. So these two are the same. This is Uni Merino by Universal Yarn. I have one skein in the color Crouton and another skein in the color Salem. So the Crouton are likely going to become socks, which, oh my gosh, shocking. But this Salem color, I think I'm going to knit a hat for my husband. He loves a good charcoal, black, gray moment. And I got these from my local yarn store, Miss Pearl. And these 3 are skeins of the fiber company Amble. I've never worked with the Universal Yarn and I've never worked with Amble, although I purchased, I think 4 or 5 skeins of this with the intention of making a sweater once, and I ended up destashing that yarn because the color just wasn't doing anything for me. But I ended up, from that same D-stash, purchasing these 3 from the same person. And I like these colors a lot more. Right, we have White Heather, we have Exodus, and Helvellyn. But all 3 of these are really good colors. And yeah, these will all become socks, most likely for myself. Those 5 skeins were the only commercially dyed sock yarns I have in my stash right now. So now we'll talk about the 2 hand-dyed variegated skeins that I have. One is from Distortion Fibers. This is their super sock base, 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and the color is Seaweed. I also got this from Miss Pearl. I just haven't gotten around to knitting it, but that's gonna change eventually. And then this I got from a D-stash. This is Farmer's Daughter Fibers Rocky Mountain Pearls. Rocky Mountain Pearls, I think that might be the colorway. It's 80% superwash BFL and 20% nylon. Oh, the color is Hill Country. And yeah, variegated. This is a higher contrast variegation. And this is probably the most variegated yarn I've ever purchased, but good deal on a D-stash. And like I said, I give myself a lot more room for adventurous color choices in my sock knitting as opposed to garment knitting. So I love all of the colors individually in this colorway. And I look at these variegated skeins, and for the life of me, I cannot picture how this is going to work up. I don't know if it's going to pull or microstripe, or I really have no idea, but I think I'm going to have a fun time finding that out. And so these are the 2 variegated skeins in my stash. Now I'll show you the hand-dyed tonals that I have. So these came from the same D-stash, a different person, but in the same group. These are Ancient Arts yarns. They're fingering sock base, 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon, and the colorway is Davy Jones Locker. I think on the screen it's coming more of a cool, it's showing as more of a cool tone blue, but this is definitely turquoise, green blue. So I have 3 skeins of these. I purchased them on the D-stash, and I thought this would be a fun garment, potentially. I get wary of knitting garments with hand-dyed yarn. To this day, I don't think I have knit a hand-dyed garment. And I have absolutely no interest in alternating skeins. So if everything works out, I will knit a tonight top, and it'll take me about 2 of these skeins. I don't plan to alternate skeins, and I hope that I don't regret that decision. I think it should be fine. The colors to me look pretty consistent between the 3 skeins. With the 3rd skein, it'll probably become a pair of socks for me or as a gift for someone else. But yeah, wish me luck on my hand-dyed garment journey without alternating skeins. I'll keep you posted on that one. And then these 2 I purchased at the Michigan Wool Festival, the Michigan Yarn Festival, Michigan Fiber Festival. Last year I went and I got these from Jamie's booth, M1 Yarns. She hand dyes yarn and sells online and at various fiber festivals around the Midwest area. And she was one of my Rhinebeck roomies. She's the one who invited me to stay in her house for Rhinebeck weekend when I went in 2022. So it was nice to see her again when I went. And if everything works out, I should be able to go again this year, unless it's happened already, which I don't think it has. The tan color is called Beach Sand, and this is her Lean Mean machine base, 80% superwash, 20% nylon. And the green is a one-of-a-kind colorway, Magical Forest. And I really like this one. So with these yarns, I have a few yarns where I have 2 or 3 skeins in different colors of the same base. And at some point I want to try my hand at knitting some micro stripe socks, which means I would knit the socks in 2 colors, but every other round would be an alternating color. And then you do solid color for the cuff, toe, and heel. It just looks really cool to me. I just don't know if it'll be too tedious to knit. So I haven't quite pulled the trigger on that project, especially since I tend to use socks as more of a on the go during my commute type of project. And I don't want to be tied to 2 separate skeins of yarn while I'm knitting a sock. So that's part of the reason I haven't done that yet, but these 2 are a prime candidate for that project whenever I do get around to it. And then lastly, I got these 2 hedgehog fiber skeins from the same person. I got this variegated skein from Farmer's Daughter Fibers. She dropped it off last night. Another D-stash purchase. This is their 90% merino, 10% nylon sock yarn base. And the color Silence is this cream color. I have a lot of cream color. I have 4 cream colored yarns, so that's interesting. And this burnt orange color is called Rusty Nail. It's a really rich, vibrant color. I have not knit anything in a color even close to this, so I'm excited to use this. And this might be the first time I ever use a 90% merino sock yarn. Usually it has at least 20% nylon, but this only has 10%, so I don't know how that is going to wear over time. But I am excited because these are just really pretty skeins of yarn. And that's everything in my stash. In terms of full skeins of sock yarn, I have 14 full untouched skeins of yarn in my stash. If I continue at the pace of 1 sock a month, this collection of sock yarn can sustain me for 28 months, almost 2.5 years. If I don't buy sock yarn for 2 full years, I can still be knitting socks. That's a crazy thought. So when I quantify it in that way, that is further justification for me to just pump the brakes on the sock yarn purchases and refocus on knitting what I have. And while we're here, I will show you what my current sock projects are. So this one I've shown on the channel before. I think I gave an update on my progress in my first quarter video where I showed you everything I made in Q1. Sock 1 is done. It's just a basic 3x1 ribbed sock in this really fuzzy, fluffy alpaca socks yarn by Lang. Can't remember the colorway, but it's a beautiful heathered green color. I love green. Can you tell? Ooh, I love a good green. Yeah, I don't love this yarn. I mentioned it before. It's not the best knitting experience. It doesn't have a lot of bounce or give to it like other sock yarns that I've used. So it's kind of ropey, a little bit harder on the hands. But I think this is going to be a very cozy sock and I'm looking forward to having it finished. I do have this marker here because I dropped a stitch, or like I only knit half of one of these stitches. And so it's a very thin thread connecting stitches right there, and I don't want it to break. So I'm going to go back and duplicate stitch to secure that a little bit better. And also I knit 80 rounds in the foot. I don't know what possessed me to do that because my vanilla sock formula is 75 rounds. And lately I've just been unconsciously deviating from that because I have been knitting socks for other people. I knit some socks for my husband. The socks I'm knitting now is a gift for someone else. And it throws me off of my rhythm. And usually with socks, I tend to just cast on and go into autopilot. But I have to remind myself, remember, you're knitting a sock for yourself. Only do 75 rounds. And I didn't get the memo when I was finishing up this sock. So it's a little bit long on my foot and I'm undecided on if I want to go back and rip out the toe, rip out 5 rounds and reknit the toe. This is a very fuzzy yarn. So I'm wondering if it is over time going to felt just a little bit and I will lose a little bit of length in the foot. So I may be okay if I just leave it as long as it is, but I have not entirely decided yet what I want to do there. And while I'm working on this other pair of socks, I'll come to a decision sooner or later. And then the active sock I'm working on right now, I have finished sock 1, vanilla sock. I have not done a stockinette sock in ages, probably a year. So this has felt like a blast from the past. And here's where I am with sock number 2. I have a very ambitious goal of finishing this entire sock today. And right now I am 8 rounds into the foot. And I'm doing 65 rounds on the foot. I can't remember what yarn this is. I think it's KFI sock something. And yeah, this is a gift from my aunt. And this is working up crazy fast. Not only is a vanilla sock, like I said, that I have not done in a long time. All the socks I've knit recently have been ribbed or cabled or textured all over in some way. So this has just been the ultimate sock palette cleanser and I am flying through this project. But not only is it stockinette, which makes it fast, it's also 64 stitches, which makes it fast because when I knit socks for myself, I do 72 stitches. So less stitches, less rounds on the foot, everything is just less. And so it has just been delightful how quickly these have been knitting up. And I don't know if once I finish this, hopefully today, if I'm going to jump back to the green fuzzy socks or cast on either a different pair of socks. Can you tell I'm just not very enthusiastic about those green socks? I'll finish them eventually at some point this year, but I just don't feel compelled to work on them. I always sort of violently oscillate between powering through something I'm hating just for the sake of having it done and knowing that I'll enjoy having it done, and just completely avoiding it and working on other things. And I'm feeling very avoidant. So chances are I'm not gonna pick that alpaca sock back up probably until like the fall or something. But once I finish this, I'm either going to cast on another sock, which is exciting because I have a beautiful collection of sock yarn here that I am just really, really eager to get into. Or I might cast on a hat or like a summer tank. Probably not a summer tank. I need to pace myself there with the garments, one at a time. But yeah, those are my sock whips. One other aspect of my sock yarn stash that I wanted to share while I have you is my scraps. So these are scraps from, I do apologize for the crinkling, but this is a bag of all of my sock scraps. Since the very beginning of my sock knitting journey, I have kept my sock yarn scraps in this bag. And yeah, it's getting pretty full. I can definitely fit a lot more in here, but at some point this is gonna fill up and I'm gonna be forced to address what's happening in this bag. Either knitting shorties or scrappy socks, or using them gradually as contrast colors in other socks. Lots of possibilities, but yeah, this is where I'm at with my sock scraps. I've seen a lot of people use their sock scraps in like scrappy blankets, crochet blankets, or knit blankets, and that could be an option, but I don't know how much use I would get out of a sock yarn blanket. Like, I guess I could hold them double to make it a little bit thicker, which would make more sense for me as a blanket. But even with that, that means that what I have here is not going to go very far, and it will take me years and years and years and years and years to complete a blanket like that. So I don't think I'm interested in saving my scraps for all of eternity to, at some point in the distant future, have a scrappy blanket of sock yarn. I don't think that's the route I want to go with. I am more inclined to use these in upcoming socks in various ways. But the other reason I wanted to show this is because I think it tells an interesting story of my sock knitting journey. So as I said, I have maintained this scrap collection from the very beginning of my sock journey, from my very first sock that I ever knit up to the most recent socks that I have completed. And you can tell sort of a shift in my sock yarn preferences and what I gravitated toward at the beginning of my journey versus now. So at the back and toward the bottom, we have a lot of variegated, self-striping, self-patterning, speckled, multicolored types of yarns. And this, I know you cannot see this very well. And maybe I can angle this differently. That might not have helped at all. But yeah, then towards the more recent leg of my journey, we see a lot of tonals and solids. And I don't know, I just think that perfectly captures this journey that I've been on and where I started versus where I am now. I used to really, really like self-striping yarns, and they are fun to knit. And I'm not saying I will never get a self-striping sock yarn again, but what I found is that although they're fun to knit, I find them difficult to wear. They just feel like something a kid would wear. And I struggle to wear them in my day-to-day life. I usually wear them around the house, or I'll wear them in shoes if I am not really going anywhere that day. Like, I know I have one here. These are some self-striping socks I knit for myself. I'm like, I'm not wearing that to work. Like, no. And you know, I'm big on knitting things that fit into my lifestyle, that serve a purpose. And the self-striping and variegated, even though I feel more free to choose those types of yarns with my socks as opposed to garments, at the end of the day, if I'm going to be wearing them in my day-to-day life, I don't want them to clash with what I'm wearing. And I don't know, I just thought it was interesting because I used to be crazy about the self-striping and the variegated and the sock yarn, and I do think it's still fun to knit, but it's not very practical for me to wear on a day-to-day basis. So over time, I have shifted away from those yarns. And as we can see from my stash, a vast majority of it is tonal or solid colors and not a whole lot of busyness going on, if you will. That is my stash and tell of all of my sock yarns. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.